بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأصلي وأسلم على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد بن عبد الله عليه أفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم، ثم أما بعد. سعداء جدا بهذا الحضور الرائع والمميز في هذه الورشة، وكلنا يعرف أهمية هذه الورشة وموضوعها. سأتحدث الآن باللغة الإنجليزية because of the workshop language, and it is stated before that the language of this workshop will be in English. First of all, it is my privilege myself to introduce Professor Patrick Griffin and Lynn Griffin, and both of them, they are scholar and figure in education, especially in evaluation and assessment. And it was a difficult job for me to search for a profile for both of them. However, I find myself lucky enough to just search their profile, which is approved by the conference. So Professor Patrick Griffin held the Chair of Education Assessment in the Melbourne Graduate School of Education from 1996 to 2015. He was the founding director of the Assessment Research Center from 1988 to 2015. He spent periods of time as head of department, deputy dean, and director of the research center. His work focused on the links between assessment and teaching in the fields of problem solving and higher order competency assessment and performance, as well as studies of literacy and numeracy development. He has been the assessment consultant for UNESCO in Southern and Eastern Africa and for the World Bank in Vietnam. He was the Executive Director of Assessment and Teaching of 21st Century Skills Project since 2010, with an impact on national and international assessments, including the PISA study of 2015 and the National Assessment of Education Progress in the USA scheduled 2017. His work has also included the development framework for teachers, classrooms, practice, and for school leaders through the Australian Institute of Teaching and School Leadership. He is currently the lead consultant for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in the transition to competence-based education system. He is Emerite Professor at the Melbourne Graduate School of Education, where he continues to lead local, national, and international projects and contribute to the teaching and research higher degree programs. This is only a brief of the briefing of our professor of today's workshop. Lynn Griffin, she is the Manager Consultant in Education Research, Master of Education at University of Melbourne, Program Manager at the State Government of Victoria from 1996 to 2016. As the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia now has a huge development and a huge transfer of education from a culture and a system which was there to a new system and a new policy of education, which is the competency-based education. This is a huge shift where many local and global governments, they try to increase the involvement of students in the process of education. I'm not qualified enough to speak about competence-based education or how this system can change the culture and the practice of teaching and learning in our schools. However, I am very proud that my Ministry of Education has done the right decision to have this as a new development to seek the progress of our education towards the goals and aims of the Vision 2030. So again, welcome you all, and I welcome my professor with Lynn Griffin together, and I will give them the time, which is around 3 hours, as they discussed with me before. The 3 hours will be a presentation, and there will be 2 activities. And I think it has been stated before that you should bring your computers, laptops with you, because there is a system and a program. Then we will work together for that. I will give them the lead. Whenever they need me, I'm here. And also for you, if you find something to be, need me to clarify things for you, I'm very happy to do that. Thank you and welcome.
Salam alaikum. That's the limit of my Arabic. So the rest of the workshop will be in English. The agenda for this afternoon, I'll first of all present something on competency-based education, because as Saeed said, that there's a massive shift in focus in the education system in the kingdom. So I'll sketch that out first and then zero in a little bit on the complex tasks and the modules that we're developing to try to shift the thinking in schools in Saudi Arabia. We'll do a little bit of a task, because what I've done is construct a complex task, but I'm not sure that my data is valid. So the first thing that you're going to do in an activity is to identify some data to use for a complex task with students. And the task could probably be applied from grade 4 through to undergraduate years because of the nature of the complexity. We're then going to talk about assessment in particular, but about the use of rubrics in assessment. I've been working on this for quite a long time, and I wish now that I didn't call it a rubric, because it carries so many other interpretations with it that we probably should call it something different. But it's too late now. There's 2 books, 4 books, 6 books have been published with it, and I can't undo it. And finally, the reason that I suggested that you might bring a laptop to this session was that I wanted to show you how classroom teachers can conduct data analytics of student performance very, very simply using Excel, and a macro that I've written to go with the data that literally says there are 4 steps: step 1, step 2, step 3, and step 4, and if you just push those buttons, it does all the data analysis for you in Excel. So we'll see if we get that far, where you can actually get some hands-on. If not, we'll make the links available for you to do that, and that will be your homework, and I'll test you again on that at the end of Thursday. So if you don't want to do the test, we'll understand that, but we will have an interview for people who don't want to do the sit-down paper and pencil test on the use of rubrics. You'll find that my humour is not very good, and when I'm joking, I have to tell people that I'm joking. So the first thing is I want to talk about competency-based education, and I'll leave it to you to decide how that's different to what happens in schools at the moment. First of all, what's competence? Every time we talk about competency-based education, we need to talk about what's competence. It's easier to talk about what a competent person is, and then come back and describe what competence. If we want to describe and develop competent people in our schools, we need the students to be able to perform particular tasks or do things, but they need to be able to respond to the context that they find themselves in. So a competent person can adjust their performance quality depending upon what context they find themselves in. Nobody operates at their maximum competence all the time. We adjust. Take, for instance, this session today. If this was a very large theatre, the performance that I would be expected to demonstrate would be very different if it was an audience of 5,000 people. But because we've got about 50 people here, then the performance will be different. We'll be very interactive. We'll also talk about what modules are, and what we're doing in competency-based education in Saudi Arabia is that we're actually developing instructional modules that are competency-based. Now, your school year is about 36 weeks, so if we've got a module that lasts for 4 weeks, then we'd need 9 modules to cover that year in that subject. And if we've got 9 modules per subject per year, then we'll have 96 or 108 modules to cover all 12 subjects, and so it goes on to about 1,000, a little more than 1,000 modules to be produced by local people in the kingdom. We're not doing it. We're training people to develop those modules. So they should have learning outcomes, and we'll talk a little bit more about that at the moment. Learning outcomes, if we stick with the current curriculum, it would be the ability to remember and produce what you've taught in class or what the teacher has shown you. But we want to add to that some 21st century skills, like critical thinking, problem solving, collaboration, communication, creativity. So when we set a task, we want those outcomes to be demonstrated by the students. It would be a bit of a big task to have everything in it, but I can show you how we can develop some creativity, some critical thinking, some problem solving and content knowledge with some fairly simple tasks. Well, they're not simple, they're complex. And a module therefore should have all the resources that a teacher will need to teach the unit. Our plan is to have a kind of a supermarket where we've got all these modules up on the internet. And the teacher takes the module, doesn't have to do anything other than go through the process that the module describes, fill out some evaluation and put it back on the internet. It's got to be easy for the teachers to use. If it's not easy, teachers will not use it. And if it's not easy to use, there will be no change in the kingdom's schools. So it's got to be very simple, straightforward, easy to do, easy to assess, easy to monitor the student development. We're also changing the way that school reports to parents will be done. No longer will the student get an A, B, C, D or F. No longer will there be a percentage score. There will be a description of the skill that the student has demonstrated and their position on a progression of increasing competence. So that will change as well with the things. And then finally, when we get the student materials, the student activity, we need to make sure that the teachers are well read in their work. The book on the left, Assessment for Teaching, has been translated into Arabic. It's being put on the web, and Cambridge University Press, the publishers of it, have agreed that one copy per teacher in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia will be available to be downloaded. And everything that I'm talking about today is covered in that text. Assessment for teaching, not assessment for learning, assessment for teaching. Formative. The other books on there won't be translated and won't be downloaded, but there are 2 books on the assessment and teaching of 21st century skills. Now see, there's a man that's really well prepared. Would you hold that up again? There you go, look at that. You can come to the front. So these 2 red-covered books are published by Springer, and they detail a project that I led on the assessment and teaching of 21st century skills for about 5 or 6 years, where we developed ways of using computers to test collaborative problem solving. Having people work collaboratively, like you're going to do because we didn't have enough handouts. So collaborative problem solving was measured again in the PISA project in 2015 in 63 countries. So the impact of that project is really quite large. The first volume is a conceptual framework for 21st century skills. The second volume is the scientific methodology used to develop and calibrate the tasks of collaborative problem solving. This is going to work on its own speed. So, some principles of competency-based education. First of all, everybody can learn, no matter how challenged they are, because we base the work on 4 different theoretical works. The first is social constructivism, which is constructed by or developed by most characteristics of Lev Vygotsky. Vygotsky's work of the zone of proximal development. How many of you have heard of that? Very good. We've developed empirical ways of identifying every student's zone of proximal development so that we can intervene at the point where the student is most ready to learn. The second is a measurement model called RASH modelling. How many of you have a measurement background? And you've heard of RASH? Right. It's a very simple idea that we can develop tasks for students to perform and line them up in terms of how difficult they are. So the easy tasks through to very difficult tasks. And we can line up the students from low ability to very high ability. And if the student's ability is greater than the task difficulty, we expect it to succeed. For example, if we think in athletics a high jump, if the bar is set about 1 metre and the person's ability to jump is 1.5 metres, we expect the person to be able to make that jump. But if the person is 1.5 metres, that's the ability they have, and the bar is put at 2 metres, we'd expect them to fail. What Rash did was talk about what happens when the person's ability is exactly equal to the difficulty of the task. No longer do we have the situation where we would expect the person to jump to succeed. We don't have the situation where we would expect the person to fail. They're equal. What would happen? Anyone? Rash showed with mathematics that the probability of that occurring would be a 50-50 chance. So if we can line up all the tasks in terms of difficulty, and we can line up all the pupils in terms of their ability, for every student who is equal to the task that they're set, we got a 50-50 chance of success. That's what Lev Vygotsky called the zone of proximal development. So we can use this kind of mathematical modelling to identify that zone. Another American, Lev Vygotsky was a Russian, Rash was Danish. An American called Bob Glaser defined criterion referencing in the 1960s and again in the 1980s. He talked about monitoring a person's progress in a very, very important and simple idea. Well, if we've got to have immediate attention, we better do that. Glaser defined criterion referencing and differentiated it from norm referencing, which almost all of our assessment is based upon. How does the student perform relative to the group they belong to? But Glaser said that doesn't help. We need to be able to monitor students' progress through stages of increasing competence. Those words, stages of increasing competence, are tremendously powerful. We have to not only understand what competence is, but we need to know how it progresses, how it gets more and more, how it gets to more sophisticated learning and teaching. What stages of increasing competence mean? It means we need to understand how performance progresses, from the simple to the complex, from the easy to the difficult. So, to the simplistic to the elegant. So all these continuum How do we map out the continuation of stages of increasing competence? And finally, the fourth one was a German called Louis Gutmann. And Gutmann showed how we could determine a person's position on that continuum using his method of scalegram analysis. But that's what I want you to be able to do. For those of you who bought the laptops, we'll do some work with the Gutmann chart analysis. And every time we get the idea of how that works, it's magic. Absolute magic in changing teacher performance. So everybody can learn. And now the point of that was that if we know how the stages of increasing competence are, and we can locate every student on that progression. So if you're a student with learning difficulties, they'd be at a very beginning stage of development. If you've got someone who's gifted and talented, they're likely to be very much higher, further along the same progression. So from a teaching point of view, it's no point doing what I'm doing, standing up and talking to 50 people all at once. We need to test you, find out where you are on the stage of development, and then work with you individually at that level. Everybody can learn. There are no exceptions. These are little things for you to remember. Competency-based education is about skills, not scores. Say that over and over and over to yourself until you believe it thoroughly, and then start telling other people it's about skills, not scores. We don't want to know what percentage score you got. As the cartoon says, who on earth would buy 3/10 of a wheelbarrow? It's about skills, defining the skills, defining the stage of increasing competence that a person is at, and then intervening to move them to the next level. And if we could move every student in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia just one level on a continuum of competence in mathematics, on a continuum of competence in science, in reading, your scores in the Pearl study, in the TIMS science and the TIMS maths would skyrocket up. But if we just continue to teach them all as though they're all the same, your 2030 goals will not be achieved at all. So how do we know whether somebody's producing, somebody's growing? It's about knowing what is evidence. Now there are 4 things that constitute evidence. It's what people do, what they say, what they make, what they write. The thing about do, say, make, write is that is obvious and evident. It's not about what they know, what they think, what they understand and what they feel, or what they believe. They're inferences because we can't see it. We've got to be able to see the evidence. It's got to be evident. So we need to define everything that we're asking the kids to do in terms of what they do, say, make, write. So now there's 2 things for you to remember. Skills, not scores, and do, say, make, write. Get that burned into the brain because that's where we've got to make the change. It's not about deficits. It's not about things that the students cannot do. We're not to stop diagnostic testing, period. Don't do it. We need to know where are they on the stage of increasing competence. And even if they're at the bottom of that progression, we can move them to the next level. Even if they're at the top of the progression, we can move them up further. We can stretch the best. We can allow for the weakest and stretch the best. So, it's evidence, it's about not deficits, it's not about fixing problems, it's about developing and putting their zone of proximal development to work so that their readiness to learn enables them to move to the next level on the stage of competence. So, it's not about content that's in the curriculum, it's not about topics, it's about skills and it's about the construct. What's a construct? In English it's really easy to explain what is a construct. The most famous is the intelligence quotient, the IQ. We tend to think that intelligence is a construct. Now, this is a little alliteration and an English word. A construct is something we construct. We build it, we construct it. It's something we construct to help us make sense of what we see them doing, saying, making and writing, and the quality of that. So it's about defining the progression. The progression is a visible sign of an underlying construct. So we're going to be able to try and teach to the construct and not teaching content. We characterise content-type curriculum as a kind of a knowledge assembly line, mass production. It's an old industrial revolution thing. We've got to change that. Oh, there's so many things that we've got to change. Get rid of tests. I'm sorry about the Qiyas people, but we have to have something different. If we want to change the curriculum, we've got to change the assessment, we've got to change the teaching, and we've got to change the nature of the curriculum simultaneously. So if we persist with multiple choice tests, and I'm not an opponent of multiple choice tests, I'm a psychometrician by training, but I don't believe they will help us change the curriculum. We've got to start believing in teacher judgment. And we've developed methods now, which I'll show you during this session, where the reliability of teacher judgment is far in excess of the reliability of standardised tests. In our work with students with additional needs or students with disabilities, our assessments there, the minimum that we've ever performed is 0.94, if that makes any sense to you. Most tests have got a reliability of about 0.8, so we're way, way ahead. If we are using tests, then we don't want a test that the students can all do so well that they get 100% on the test. If they get 100% on the test, we have no idea where they are. They're just beyond that test. The best score on a test from a teacher's point of view, from a student's point of view, is 50%. Can you believe that? Try and convince the teachers to set tests that the best students can only get 50% on it. But when they get 50%, we're in that in that zone of proximal development. It changes the way we can use tests. Sometimes I write this a bit different. It's about the students. It's not about the teacher. It's about intervention, not acting. So when we got somebody out the front, like me, performing, it's like I'm acting. I should be giving you tasks to do. I'll get to that. It really is about doing things, not just knowing stuff. So we want to be able to make sure that that happens as well. Okay, now that's the theory lesson over. We're going to start work. I've designed a task which is in the papers that have been put on your tables. And it's about giving the students a task to do, or data for the students to interpret, about litter collection at school. Now I've made up the numbers in the table because I don't know enough about the litter patterns of children in Saudi Arabia. So your first task is to validate my table. Talk amongst yourselves on the paper. What kind of litter would you see in the schoolyard in Saudi Arabia? Cans, water bottles, tissues. Okay, I want you to adjust the table. Doesn't matter if we got 50 different versions of the table. I want you to adjust the table that's in that handout. Talk about it amongst yourselves, and then I'll get one brave person to come out and change the table here. Okay, we're going to give you about 5 minutes to do that because you shouldn't take very long. Yeah, it's on page 5 of the handout. Okay, talk amongst yourselves. Doesn't matter if we don't all agree. We just want to get some idea of what the litter patterns would be. So we'll get that first. You have to work collaboratively because I only made 30 copies of the handout. Okay? Anyone not understand the task? What would the litter pattern... Fix it. Fix my table. That's what you've got to do. No, change. If you think it's nonsense, cross it out and put what you believe to be the kind of litter and a reasonable relative number. So what would cans be the most frequent? I think water bottles probably more, but anyway, I'm going to trust your judgment. What would be the most frequent and the least frequent kind of litter? Okay? We'll wander around and just check.
Some people are concerned that they don't have handouts, so just be clear that you're supposed to work together.
Work together, we put at least one on every table. Right, now, we're going to make it harder, increase the difficulty. We'll now assess your ability to predict litter patterns. So, what would be the effect of the day of the week on litter patterns in the schoolyard? For example, what would you find on a Friday? How would that differ to a Thursday? Yes, but how would the litter pattern change? Would you have more or less litter on a Friday than on a Thursday? Of course you would have less because the students are not there. What about on a wet day, if it was raining in Riyadh, in those wonderful rare days when it rains in Riyadh? Not so much that they close the schools, but what sort of pattern of litter would you have on a wet day? What about a dry day, a hot, really hot day? What kind of litter would you have? Yes, ice creams, water bottles, soft drinks. So, now, when it's really hot, when it's cold, when it's wet, what about the day of the week? What sort of rubbish would you have? Now, what you're going to do as a teacher, you're going to make up these tables and you're going to give them to the student. So we want to know how you would even present the data. What would be the effect of Friday and Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? What about when it's really hot, 46 degrees in the shade? No, not 55, they go home if it's that hot. But yes, what sort of litter would you have? So there'd be more ice cream wrappers, there'd be more icy pole sticks, there'd be more water bottles. There might even be just water bottle tops lying around. So how would it differ from weather day, hot days to cold days, wet days to dry days, days of the week? Very different. We'll write down your estimate of the number of those things. Now, see, I told you it would get tough quickly. It was easy to say, fix the first one. Now you've got to hypothesize. You've got to formulate an hypothesis about weather and how it affects the litter pattern, about the day of the week and how that affects the weather pattern. You are now a scientist formulating an hypothesis, and your grade 4 students can probably do this better than you. Because when grade 4 students learn to make some expressions, when a grade 4 student says to you, miss, sir, what about? It depends whether it's hot or cold. What if? 3 expressions for you to remember. What if, what about, and it depends. Because as soon as you get grade 4, grade 5 students, grade 6, grade 12 students challenging you and saying, it depends. What about a hot day? What about a cold day? What they're doing is they're challenging you. They're challenging your ability to make a generalization that litter is always the same. Well, what about the temperature? It depends. What if the day is wet, rainy? Then, some more whatabouts. What about where you look for the litter? Is it where they have lunch? Is it where they have morning break? Is it at the gate of the school? Is it outside the school? So the area. What about the area? Now we're really getting into some competency stuff. What about, what if, it depends. They're the three expressions we've got to get students used to saying, because when they do that, it's even in grade 4, they're formulating an hypothesis. They're testing an hypothesis. They're formulating, they're conjecturing. And we call that higher order thinking. 3 signs of higher order thinking. What are they? What if? What about? And it depends, yes. And if we have every student in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia saying, what about, what if, and it depends, we've got them all thinking in higher order thinking. What an exciting thing. Some of my students at the University of Melbourne come in and tell me how many what ifs they get each week. They count them. So, our task now is we've formulated, you have set the hypothesis about the weather, about the area, about the days of the week, right? Now, you've now tested you've made generalizations about the weather, about the day, and about the area. And you want to write that down and give it to your grade 4 students, or perhaps you give it to your first year university students. What would be the difference? Not much. Not much. You just get a more sophisticated answer from your university students. But your grade 4 students can do it too. So, what would your grade 4 students have as a learning outcome for your module now? If it was just knowledge of content, it would be about litter. It would be about litter. What sort of task is this? What is the skill? What is the competence that's underpinning this particular task? Don't be afraid to volunteer an answer, because you cannot be wrong. That's the beautiful part about this sort of thing. There are only right answers. What are you doing? What sort of skill are you engaged in? Critical thinking? Yes, certainly. How are you doing creative thinking? You're not wrong, I just want to know your answer, that's all. Problem solving is certainly there. What's it likely to be in the curriculum for schools? What's it likely to be in the grade 4, grade 5, grade 6 through to grade 12 curriculum? It's not in your curriculum. Critical thinking is not in the curriculum. It's what? Confirmation. Information, yes. It's about classification. You've got categories, days of the week. You've got areas, school gate, courtyard, classroom, tuck shop. Do you have a tuck shop? No. Lunch area. It's about weather, hot days, cold days. And in each one of those kinds of classification, you're putting a number which indicates how much litter is generated in those days. It's about classification, and classification is the first step of problem solving. So we're now beginning not just to get generating hypotheses and challenging generalizations and doing all that higher order thinking, we're classifying, we're organizing data. We're getting different ways to present the data. We're asking the students to say, what and where was the litter located? So if in your chart you wrote 6 drink cans This was one day's litter. Was there 6 drink cans every day? What is the total number of drinks sold? How would you test that? No correct answer. I'm just seeding you ideas that you've got to talk amongst yourselves. Okay. We've got problem solving and critical thinking. We had that answer, yes. We also have some higher order thinking. What do we mean by that? You all know Bloom's taxonomy? Indeed. Everybody knows knowledge, understanding, and application, and we generally write that in our test design, but we don't have much about analysis, evaluation, creativity. So we need to see, are they able to analyse the data? Okay, I want you to now discuss this in your groups. Make notes on your handout, and then I'll begin to collect some of your ideas in about 10 minutes, okay? Some of you would like to put this in a context of teaching a subject in school. You might be teaching science, so you want to put it in a context of the environment. You might be teaching social education, so you want to put this in a context of responsibility. By all means, do that in terms of your teaching, but we do want to know how this can get to the point where your grade 4 through to university students start saying it depends. What if? What about? And it doesn't matter whether it's in science, in social education, even mathematics. Doesn't matter, it crosses the disciplines. Okay? 10 minutes. Now we have at least one, maybe more, who take the age of the student into account. What if it's a secondary school? What if it's an intermediate school? What if it's a primary school? Would the primary school students have different patterns of litter than the secondary schools? I don't know. What if? It depends. What about? See, this is what you've got to ask yourself now. What about? What if? It depends. And the more you get used to doing that, the more likely it is that your students will start to learn how to do that and feel able to do it. Okay, some people are getting a little impatient. I want to move on. We've got the data. Now you have some data that you might give to the students. What sort of learning outcomes might you look for amongst the students? Now it's starting to get tough. This is more difficult. This is more difficult. It's easy to make up patterns of data, litter, to say, well, on a wet day, most of the litter would be inside the school. On a dry day, it might be outside. It depends on the weather. Now, if you were writing learning outcomes for knowledge of the content, this would be about the environment and litter in the environment. Okay? If you were thinking about problem solving or critical thinking, you would have different learning outcomes that you would want the students to be able to demonstrate. If you wanted them to think about higher order thinking, what if, it depends, these are higher order thinking things. It depends, what if, what about. If we wanted them to you wanted the students to develop learning outcomes associated with higher order thinking, you'd be thinking about that. What are the generalizations you make, and how would you critically review them? And if you wanted them to be creative, what sort of learning outcome would they have if you wanted your students to be creative? Now, I'm going to walk around the room and I'm going to label each table, each group, with a particular learning outcome. For this one here, it's just creativity. What creative outcomes would you do with the data that you've just made up? For this one, it's problem solving. For this one, it's critical thinking. For this table, it's content. For this table here, it's collaboration. How do they work together? For this table here, it's communication. How many C's are we up to? So, here, creativity, collaboration, communication. Here we have critical thinking, outcomes of critical thinking, higher order thinking, problem solving. We want to see problem solving outcomes. How many people do we have here? On your own? You have to work hard. Creativity, critical thinking. I'm not going to make you work because you have to be the boss. Creativity, critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, communication, collaboration, critical thinking. Has anybody not got an assignment? Right. Did I miss you? Yes. Problem solving outcomes. How do they solve problems?
Which outcomes? The one that we just write it down?
There's some examples in the book, in the notes. For example, problem solving. It is a problem. Litter is a problem. How do we go about solving it? Right. You solve problems. Why? Yes, you can. But it depends, and what about is an easy way to do it. Why do they do this? Yes, that would be very good. In fact, that would lead to creativity. Now, feel free to move around and to share your ideas with other people doing the same thing. But this is what's called collaboration. Working together to solve a single problem. Now, I'm going to give you about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to ask for different examples of learning outcomes that you would like to share with us. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to raise? If we can ask a general question so that everybody can share. Wait a minute.
Should we add to the learning outcomes that you wrote here? Yes. Or we came up with our own problem and write our own outcomes.
Good. Write your own, don't copy mine. There's no challenge in copying mine.
The curriculum in Saudi Arabia here, it's from America or Australia. It's translated to Arabic, but it's not in the same cultural and not the same environment. Environment here in Saudi Arabia, it's not an environment in Australia. So the curriculum translate from English to Arabic. It's the same, not the same cultural. How to solve this problem in a curriculum? Thank you.
Let me see if I got the question correct. It's actually a beautiful question. It's a perfect question. The culture is different in Saudi Arabia than it is in Australia. What about the Saudi curriculum and how the Saudi culture and how it would affect litter patterns? Is that right? How do we translate this from Australia to Saudi? What about the difference in culture? Have to do some?
When we transfer something from the culture to another culture, there's something we need to do it to make it possible to do it in this society because of the language and culture and several things, yeah. So that's why we need to do accommodation.
Accommodation, that's right. What about the Saudi? Oh, goodness, that's why it's such a perfect question. It depends. I don't know the answer. It depends. What about Saudi culture? What if it's in the rural, the isolated parts of Saudi Arabia, not in the big cities? So it's not only the Saudi culture versus Australian culture, it's about in the north, up on the borders of Iraq. Do we get a different culture there? So there isn't such a thing as a Saudi culture, right? There's lots. What about where the region is? Too complicated for now. We'll just stick with where you found it in the school. When you get to year 12 and undergraduate students, you can start asking them the what-if questions like that. It's such a perfect question. You're challenging the question itself. Any other questions that people would like to ask? I love questions when I don't know the answer.
I want to add just something to him, if you don't mind. Here we are talking about the skills and the 21st century skills and the higher order skills. The problem is the same. It is the mind of the students. If you train him from the elementary stage to the university stage, he will use the thinking skills, whatever the content is. It is not about the content here. It is about the way of thinking, even if it is in Arabic. In our religions, many saying or ayahs from the Quran advise every person from the beginning to think. But the culture of thinking is there in our Quran and in our religion and in our culture. But how we apply this in the curriculum, here is the issue. To think about this and to relate it to the curriculum, I think the Saudi teacher will face the time and the amount of the curriculum in each class. There are other also obstacles for the teachers, but in a way or another, he may or she may find a way to engage these critical skills or thinking skills in the curriculum. Thank you.
Another perfect question. That was really a perfect question. What about the culture, the critical thinking, the curriculum as it sits? It depends on so many things. I'm never going to be able to answer these questions. All I can say is, you've asked a question which started with, what about? You are again challenging. One of the things that I try to teach teachers to do is not to share their good ideas. You get a group of teachers together, and they've all got good ideas on how to solve a problem. And I often say to teachers, put up your hand if you share your good ideas with your colleagues. How many of you do that? Share your good ideas. Well, I want you to stop it. Stop sharing good ideas. Why? Why? Who said they're good ideas? Who said they were good ideas? The person who didn't know what to do next got a good idea to how to fill in time. Challenge. Always challenge the good idea. How do you challenge? You don't say to the person, you don't say, how would you know? You challenge them in terms of how would it change the student's learning.
About collaboration, we should share our
No.
Why not?
I've spent something like 10 years studying collaboration. Let me tell you what it is. There are 4 things in collaboration, and if these 4 things are not present, it's not collaboration, it's group work. They must share a common goal. That is, they must believe in what you're trying to achieve. Belief. Belief is the first one. They must be able to contribute. Everyone must be able to contribute uniquely to the task. You don't get 6 people all the same working, you get 6 different people. They must be able to benefit from the work of other people. So, share, believe, give, receive, and the last thing is trust. You must be able to depend upon your colleagues. Trust them. Don't take over the task and do it for them. You must trust them. So, belief, give, receive, and trust. If you've got those 4 things, you've got collaboration. I'm sorry I didn't do that before I told some people to work on collaboration, but now you know. It's not about sharing a good idea, it's about sharing the same goal. Believing in what you're trying to do. Okay, now, yes. You have to tell everybody.
Okay, I think I have a loud voice anyway. What I mean that we don't share a best idea because the best idea from my point of view may be not the good idea for my colleagues. But when we share with each other, we share our good practices. The good practice, which depends on my content and my skills, on my student, on the number of the student of the class. So my colleagues have all the freedom if she or he would like to practice it or add to it. That's what I mean by collaboration.
That's very good. That's very good. We do. I don't want you to stop sharing ideas. I know I said stop it now. I want you to stop only sharing, and you must challenge a good idea. It's not a good idea if it doesn't affect the way and what students learn. It just fills in time for the teacher and makes the teacher feel good. If it changes the way students learn and what the students do, say, make and write, if it changes that, it is a good idea. But it's not just a good idea because you've got a new book that you can look at. It's not a good idea because you've found this new experiment that you can do in science. It's not a good idea because you've suddenly realized that you're a week behind in the curriculum, so you know a quick way to get further ahead. That's not a good idea unless it changes what the students do, say, make and write. Then it's a good idea. But unless it changes what they do, say, make and write, it is not a good idea. And you should not share it. And if you have someone sharing that sort of idea with you, you challenge them. How does it change what they do, say, make and write? If there's no answer to that, look for another solution, because that's not a solution. It's just a teacher performance. It's not about students and learning. Does that answer your question? Good. It depends on whether it's a good idea or not. It depends on whether it changes what they do, say, make and write. What if it doesn't change what they do, say, make and write? What if it doesn't? So there's 3 what-ifs and 2 what-ifs, and immediately life's so full of what-ifs, and it depends. That if we can just think that way, we'll challenge everything, ourselves. If what I'm doing today has had no effect and what I've done today has wasted your time and mine. So I'll be stern about the challenge and not sharing. Because I don't want to waste my time, I certainly don't want to waste yours. We're going to be here for 3 hours, we've got 50 people, that's 150 hours wasted if we got no change whatsoever at all. So I want you to go away with remembering, it's about skills, it's about what they do, say or write, it's about what ifs and it depends and what about. Just remember those few things and it will change your life. and our 150 hours of work will be well spent. On Thursday, I'll tell you how this all comes together for Saudi curriculum, but I can't do that today. Okay, I want to hear some creative thinking outcomes. Hands up those who were assigned creative thinking. Creativity?
With litter, we can ask them some questions, like, can you give about recycling litter? Can you give me another way to recycle their litters? Give them a chance to explain it for me. We design a new.
Very good, thank you. That's about questions and what to do with recycling. Who were the other creativities? This table here, wasn't it? Creativity? Would you?
Yes, we can ask the students to think about a project in order to save the environment from the waste, for example. Yeah, to work on this project inside the school and outside the school.
Very good, very good, thank you. Who else was to do with creativity? They've all gone to ground. Here we go. Your creative outcome.
Yes. We are talking about teaching English, and we want to teach students and to reach new solutions and creative ways to learn new words in English.
Good, good. Problem solving. Is that right?
No? Problem solving.
Critical thinking.
Critical thinking.
An example now of critical thinking. So I've let the creativity people disappear. That was creative.
Evaluate about critical thinking. It's evaluate the plan. About this problem, do you have any idea about evaluating the plan?
If we would like to ask a question about critical thinking and litter, so we can say, why does litter affect our environment?
Thank you. Yes, sometimes we miss the obvious. If we have a grade 4 student and we want something creative, we ask them to draw a picture. We get them to draw a picture of what the world would be like if we didn't collect our litter, and what it would be like if we did. And we get them to explain their picture. We could probably do the same with university undergraduates. We get a different picture. Problem solving. Who were the problem solvers? Here we go. Tell everybody.
I think before I start with the creativity, I have to start with the critical thinking. I do start with the problems first, then the creativity. Now I have a lot of letters, so I may ask the students to stop using disposables and bring their cups. They can use their own cups for water and any drinks, any beverage they want to drink at school, they can use their own cups instead of bringing plastic containers and bottles and all of these things.
Very good.
Thank you.
So we're now taking care of the environment. We're finding new and different ways to do that with the students. What about communication? Here. Communication. Outcome to do with communication. Tell everyone. Okay. Who else was on communication? Hey, there you go.
I think here there is a rule for media literacy. I can ask the student to go outside to collect, for example, a video or something like this in order to display the video in front of the other kids regarding the garbage and the literacy in the environment. This is here we inject within the curriculum also the media literacy for the students. This is also will inhibit and promote the proper communication of the students.
Now when you go back to work, you start working on instruments to measure that, right? You're at Qiyas? You're from Qiyas?
No, no, no.
No, oh well. Anyway, you're going to work on how to develop that. That's very good. So there's all different ways that we can pull this together. What's it got to do with competence? Let's see, we've had creativity, critical thinking, problem solving, collaboration, yes? Who have I missed? Content, the obvious one. Content, the easy one. You were content? A content outcome.
Okay. I always believe that students will never learn about things unless they use all sense, like vision, smells, touches. So I think the content should be like present some of the photos, videos about how letters affect our environment, and give them the opportunity to discuss how they can prevent such horrible thing that might happen to the environment.
That's excellent. The content is about litter, about the environment. So we need to learn about that as well. So I don't want to think that we only do higher order thinking. Knowledge is an important part of it. We need to be able to make sure that we do have the basic knowledge to make conjectures, to make critical thinking, to solve problems. We need knowledge as the basis of that. So we don't dismiss knowledge. It's just we need more than that in a competency-based curriculum. And what I've heard you say today is lots of things about what the students would do. I didn't hear much about what they would say, what they would make, what they would write. We didn't hear much about that. But they can be very creative in writing for you as well. So, we're going to move on to the most difficult part of the workshop. Oh my goodness. Does it get harder than that? You betcha. This is the hardest part because I want you to write rubrics now. And instead of using, well, we'll try to make it fairly standardized. So we're going to talk about rubrics. I said at the beginning that when we first started working in this area, I called these things rubrics, and I really regret it because rubrics have such a, what we call baggage, that they carry with them. So, here's a diagram that you need to also become very familiar with it. If you read the book that our friend here has, Assessment for Teaching, chapters 5 and 6 are all about judgment-based assessment and rubrics. So, back to lecturing for a little while, and then you have more work to do. This would be the curriculum that we might think. We might have mathematics, we might have linear algebra, we might have environmental science, we might have litter in environmental science. This is the subject itself. These are the levels within a subject. If it was English language, for instance, English, the domains would be speaking, listening, reading and writing, right? And then within listening, speaking, reading and writing, we'd be able to divide that into the receptive skills and the productive skills. Within the productive skills, we might be talking about being able to write essays. That would be a capability. The ability to write essays in English. Sometimes we stop at that point. We say that's the learning outcome, but now we're going to take it two steps further. Now, let's come back to litter, because we're so good at it, and we've had so much practice at defining problems in litter and solutions for that. Now, you have written a creative, a critical, a problem-solving, a content, outcome. What would be the evidence of those abilities that you've said you would like the students to learn in this topic? What can you now describe what the evidence is? What is evidence?
Do you mean how could we measure?
No, I don't mean how could we measure. We're going to get to that next. How would we know? What is the evidence? They could write a journal, yes. They could write. They could do things. They could say things. They could make things.
We might give some tasks so that we can observe such kind of skills.
Ah, a testing man. Yes, we could. We could. There's no doubt about that. But I don't want you to. I want you to learn something new that's not about testing. This is about writing rubrics. So what would be the evidence? Now, can we write a sentence which says the student would do this, say this, make this, write this? A performance, not tick the box, okay? It could be an open-ended test. It could be something that write a paragraph about it. But what would we do? What would we have the students do, say, make, or write? Now, I'm going to take you through some rules for writing rubrics that are going to make you feel very uncomfortable. See, this is the domain, the subject itself, but the capabilities, now we start getting into the competencies. Here we've got the indicators. What is the evidence? And then we're going to do, if they write a paragraph about litter in the schools, how well do they write the paragraph about litter in the schools? How well? So, what do we have as a learning outcome? What is the evidence of that learning outcome? And how well do they demonstrate that evidence? These are really difficult questions, and you're going to find this hard to do, particularly the how well. And I'm going to put some restrictions on what you can write. You cannot, must not write an indicator of evidence with a count in it. Not 6 things they picked up in the school is not as good as 12 things they picked up in the schoolyard. Making 3 mistakes is not better than making 6 mistakes. Numbers are out. We don't want any counts. We're also going to write no comparatives. I don't know what this is in Arabic, but we don't allow any adjectives. So no good, better, best. It's got to be active verbs that we use. No comparatives, no steps. Step 1 in solving the litter problem is not better than step 2. Step 1 could be done at different levels of quality. Step 2 could be done differently, okay? No conjunctions. What do the English language people know what I mean there? What's a conjunction? No ands, no buts, no so's. Thens, yes. Because there must be one single idea in the indicator. No ands, buts, so's, thens. No things that links 2 ideas or more. I think we'll leave it at that. We don't write, you're going to have trouble with this anyway. We won't write more than 4 levels of quality. We'll be lucky if we can write 2, but that's... Now, These are the rules for writing rubrics. The indicator, what is the evidence and how well does that evidence be demonstrated? Let's just write the indicator first. What is the evidence of your outcome that you've written? Let's just do that first. Then I advise people to look at these rules and forget them. Just write. Break all the rules. We'll fix it later. Now, how do you know? How do you know that the student used the idea of critical thinking that we learned in the Quran? How do you know that he applied that critical thinking to the litter problem in the school? What's the evidence that that application took place? Okay? Problem solving. What's the evidence that... I've forgotten yours was problem solving, critical thinking? Tell me again. Yes, what was the outcome?
Why does litter affect our environment?
What's the evidence that they understand why litter affects the environment? How do you know? Okay? What yours was? Problem solving. What was the problem outcome? Future jobs. How does litter? That's very creative. How does litter create future jobs? What's the evidence that they understood that it would be the case? How would you know if your students knew that? I don't want you to answer now. Think about it and write it down. No. Yes.
We had a critical thinking about asking students, what if there was no litter pens? Putting students in a problem and thinking, how would they be able to really outcome this? Like not having a litter pen in school, how would that affect them, put them in that problem or situation?
If they had no litter in school?
Litter pens.
Yes.
That would put them in a problem that they would like minimize their consumption of litter, like plastic and something like that.
Let me just see if I got that right. What if there was no litter in the school?
Litter pens, not the litter. The garbage cans.
Oh, what if there were no garbage cans in the school? What a brilliant idea. What if there were no garbage bin? You see, it's so simple to get a what if. All you need to do is think of something different. How would you know that the students could consider the possibility that there was no garbage can in the school? What would they know? Don't tell me. That's the question I'm posing to you. Write it down. So, who else has a brilliant idea like that? Everybody. We can't go to everybody, so just a few. You've got one here. Thank you. I'm going to cause a collapse of furniture soon. Here we go.
Yeah. Here I try to write a rubric drawing on the example of letter, and it is the observable behavior acts toward the letter, and how I'm gonna measure the outcomes is for example, the school waste amount after taking that action toward the letters.
After the students have taken the lesson on litter in the schools, there is a dramatic reduction of litter. What happened to the litter? So, let's take a look at some draft rubrics, and I want you to repair them. So, what I normally do is I ask you to write this in Excel. So we just use a spreadsheet. If you don't have your computers with you, you can't use Excel, obviously. So the format is that the learning outcome has a couple of indicators, pieces of evidence, then what we call the how well does this piece of evidence illustrate the problem, we call that a quality criterion. So your comment was about how did the course affect the students' amount of litter in the school? How well do you think the students themselves would have learned that? Every student would have to make some contribution if the total amount of litter was to be reduced. How well did they understand that problem, that solution? How well did they understand the problem of no garbage cans in the school? How well did they do that? How well did they understand the notion that the problem could be solved? So that's the format. The learning outcome, the evidence, and then how well, which we call quality criteria. Let's have a look at a couple. I don't want you to write a lot, just one. Just one rubric. It's going to take a little bit of time. It's not easy to do. It's difficult. And some of you may surrender at this point, but don't give up. Right. The evidence was that the student could identify what kind of litter and where it was located. What and where the litter was located. Was it at the school gate? Was it in the courtyard? Was it in the classroom? Was it down the street, near the school? How well they answered that would be that there was... notice the first one is that we tried to develop the rubric with the students, but the student couldn't give us an answer. Not a good rubric, but we tend to say a 0. I'll talk from here. Usually we find some students can't give an answer at all to the question. That's okay. If it was a multiple choice test, that'd be scored with a 0. And if they got the right answer, that would be scored with a 1. Now we treat every quality criterion like a multiple choice question. If they can do it, we score it with a 0. If they cannot do it, we score it with a 1. 1 just means, in the first example, 1 just meant that they could list the litter that they found in the school. Make a list. A little bit better than that, they could summarise the type of litter. It's better than just making a list. In the second one, identifies the largest number of drink containers, soft drink cans. Could be that they just name the soft drink cans. So there's so many Coke cans, there's so many Sprite cans, there's so many Pepsi cans, there were so many drink bottles. But a little bit better than that, they could say, well, we found the drink bottles near the school gate because they weren't allowed to bring the bottles into school. So they begin to respond a little bit better. Quality. The third one, number 4, estimates the total number of soft drink containers sold. Could be that they had an argument where the drink containers would be found. And they could explain the possible amounts of litter. Now, there's 2 things to notice. What's the first word in each quality criteria? What sort of word is it? It's a? No. What kind of word is list, summarise, name, plan, list, tabulate, argues, explains? What sort of words are they? They're verbs. But they're more than verbs because there's not a think in it, is there? They're all action verbs, they are observable verbs. And the reason to write it in this format is that we get the verbs right next to one another and we can see that they become increasingly complex. Now we're getting into the idea that I talked about earlier on, stages of increasing competence. If we want to identify the stages of increasing competence, then we've got to have these verbs that demonstrate increasing complexity, increasing sophistication, increasing difficulty. Okay? So the first word that you want to be thinking about is the verb. And to help you with that, in the last 2 pages of the handout, Bloom's taxonomy, Bloom's revised taxonomy, has been listed. And the verbs, the questions, the kind of activities that you might give the students are listed there for you. So the first thing you do is write the verb for how well. Okay? And don't feel that you must make it up, because the lovely thing that all these people that have worked with Bloom's taxonomy is that they've made knowledge, understanding, application, analysis, evaluation and creativity increasingly more sophisticated. So you've got a set of verbs that you can use straight away. And in this example, which I took off the web, in this example I've got the kind of activity that you can use. So what if it is about litter in the school? How would it apply? What's the kind of question that you might ask? And how might we stress the gradation of difficulty of the verbs? So, first of all, work with your team to identify the verbs that might be related to your solution, your indicator, your evidence of the increasing knowledge. It's not cheating, it's just giving you that framework to use, and it makes it a lot easier. I'm not pretending that it's easy in a 3-hour workshop. We take weeks to train people to do this. Okay. Are there any questions about what you're expected to do? Yes? Ask the same question for everybody.
In Saudi Arabia, we are working towards competence-based learning. Are we, as a teacher, asked to make rubrics for our subjects that we are teaching in the near future?
No. And yes. It depends. What if you start a new topic where the rubrics have not been written for you? So it depends. See, there's no such thing as a definitive answer, is there? Frustrating, isn't it? He attended this workshop and he didn't give you a single answer all day. He just dodged it by saying, well, it depends. Well, what about? The fact is that the modules will be put up on the web and you can use them. And if you can write better rubrics, terrific. But you don't have to. Anyone else with a question to which my answer will be, it depends? No? Well, that's excellent. You're ready to go. Look at the verbs, arrange them in order of difficulty, and you've written a rubric. It's as easy as that. Oh, here we go. It depends, I can already tell you that. Yeah, oh, good. So you want to start with what if, yes?
What if the content can't help me in building my rubric? There are no high-level competencies, for example. Everything about information. I am as a teacher can do nothing with the content. So I will try by extra activity, but also we are controlled by the time. Thank you.
That's a very profound and insightful statement about a content-based curriculum. That all you require of the students is to remember and tell you what the teacher said or what the textbook said, but we're going to change that. So what we want is a curriculum that forces us to go beyond the content of the textbook. I'm sure you do things on the environment. I'm sure you do things in mathematics and problem solving that are about classification. We want to go beyond the curriculum. So, it depends upon the topic. And it depends upon the teacher's capability of thinking beyond the recitation, beyond remembering, beyond understanding, beyond applying, to analysing, evaluating and creative. That's just Bloom's taxonomy. We can look at other taxonomies as well. If you read the book, you'll find it talks about attitudes and values. The increasing sophistication of somebody's attitude and values. You'll see that's called the Krathwohl affective domain. You'll find that the book also takes you into expertise, something called Dreyfus. And there's what we call the solo taxonomy, which is about the sophistication of ideas. But today we'll just concentrate on Bloom, because everybody's heard of it. But it's not the only answer, because we could build in attitudes to litter, values, we could build in expertise about their knowledge, experts and novices. Novices are people who must do every step one at a time and don't allow any change. And we could also use the solo, what's called the solo taxonomy, which is about the complexity of ideas. So Bloom is about knowledge, Krathwohl's is about attitude, Dreyfus is about expertise, and the solo taxonomy is about ideas. So there's a whole world of change of ideas that should be able to meet all of those. But let's just focus today on the easiest one. If this is the easy one, the others are, you can imagine, this is the easy one. Okay? All the verbs are there. We want you to write one rubric, one evidence statement, and then 2 or 3 levels of quality using the verbs at the back of the handout. Okay? Just one. Just one. Goodness, that will give us enough heart trouble. Okay? Now I'm going to go every table this time to list and describe the indicator and the quality criteria. Every table, there will be no exceptions. Yeah, we've got time. There's a whole hour left and I think we'll probably use most of it. I'm just reminded that this should be based on the previous activity. When you describe the outcome and the evidence, just keep going with that example using the verbs.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Naif Amtari. I'm really envious of you guys with Patrick. When Patrick first, the first word I heard of him about competency, he said what could possibly go wrong. which encompassing of the huge work that we're about to do in the kingdom. Writing rubrics is in fact one of the basic assessment things that has been going wrong for ages. And it wasn't, I was writing rubrics for a while, but I didn't know how wrong I was. My rubrics would measure things, and always I would come up with different rating for the item that I am measuring and assessing, which really I didn't know why, until this genius came up with the solution. In his book, Assessment for Teaching, you'll find rules. These rules will help you to write rubrics. It will guide you to write the criteria and how the criteria measures exactly what it's supposed to measure and how that all builds all into an indicator. I know talk is simple, but once you do that, you'd find it's very useful, it's very intuitive.
This is the first 10 minutes of writing rubric.
Oh. So should I continue or?
Yes, just tell me. The road is long.
Yes, have no mistake. The road is long, and you're going to do lots of reiteration. This is what rubrics are. You do it now, and then you go and test it, and then it comes back with data that doesn't make any sense, and then you make changes, and then it begins to take form, which is long. You don't expect things to go just like that. It takes time. I mean, it took him time to just start molding us into the right shape to fit into the criteria. I'm really glad to be here to talk to you guys. And I think that you've just hit the jackpot in this conference. I mean, this is the prize.
Surprise, they call me. Naif, don't disappear. Naif is one of 24 very, very highly accomplished and very privileged people who we call the champions of competency-based education. We've been working with you now for about 6 months. That gives you some idea that we're just giving you a taste of the issue today. So while it's frustrating and you're finding it difficult, well, these people have been through that. All 24 of you. Is there 24 still? Yeah, so they will be wandering around Saudi Arabia, talking to people, demonstrating, introducing, and they are the champions of competency-based education. And Naif is one of our best examples. And if he tells you that it was tough, that it took a long time, it took some months to get the idea right, when you do get it right, there's no turning back. You can't ever go back to the way you were, because if you do, you know you're wrong. So, all we want you today is one rubric, not a whole subject, not a whole year, just one rubric, which has an indicator and 2 or 3 or 4 quality criteria. And the quality criteria can be constructed from the list of verbs at the end of your handout. Just do one, and then we'll come and listen to you talk about it. I hope that Naif inspires you to keep working on this, because he and 23 others have been through a great deal of training. And we're not going to achieve this in 3 hours, 150 total hours. But if you remember the what if, it depends, and what about, if you remember the do, say, wait, make right, if you remember that it's skills, not scores, we've kicked a lot of goals. Okay. Back to your rubrics. Okay, let's see if we can achieve something from this exercise. I want you just to talk to me about the indicator and 2 or 3 verbs that you've used from Bloom's taxonomy. So first just the indicator and maybe 2 or 3 verbs, okay?
Recommend methods to deal with litter in school in hot weather. This is the rubric. And the first level will be no attempt or irrelevant data. The second level will be describe how hot weather affect the litter in the school. The next level will be draw a relationship between the observation he see in the school and what he learned in science topics like chemistry or biology or math or something like that. The last level or the highest level will be like designing a strategy to keep some kind of conditioning or for the letter.
Now, if that hasn't intimidated everybody else, that was really, really good. You're still working on it, so I'm going to come back to you. This table, your example outcome and verbs.
Yes, we make it something very simple. Recall information about types of letter products. The first one was no answer. 2, name at least 1 out of 5. 3, name more than 3 types. And 4, name all of the types stated in the textbook.
Thank you for that. What rule did you break? No counts, right? But very good. Thank you. Now this table, the indicator and some verbs. This table.
Estimate the lifestyle of the learners in the school. And number 1 will be insufficient evidence or irrelevant answers. 2, describe the school letter status. And the last one, student will be able to argue whether higher sale products will inform him about the lifestyle of the other students.
We're getting pretty sophisticated. This is. You all set? No? You? No? Is there more here? Yes.
I have something similar. Collecting information about letters inside the school, but I have indicators. Estimate the numbers of the letters inside and outside the school, and counting the recycling containers inside the school, counting how many students and school staff inside the school, then using the web to search on...
Wow. What do you think, Naif? I say it is. What was wrong with you guys? You took months to get to that level. Have you done this? No? Ready? Here we go.
We had the same question about can you see possible solution to not having little pens in school. So the verbs that we are looking for is what are the actions that these students could take not having such a, or how do they solve their problems? The indicators would be like actions, what are the plans that they're going to take, procedures, show action, develop a plan.
I must say, this is really fantastic for me. I think you've nailed it, as they say. This table, you got one?
The students explain about the jobs in the future, have a list of some jobs in the future, a list, and compare between the jobs in the future and the old or traditional jobs.
How about this group? Ready? This table, ready? I am developing an hypothesis that the women are far better at this than the men. And this gentleman wants to prove me wrong.
If we mention the numbers, that means we break the law? Okay. Because the previous exercise was about learning new ways to learn new English words, we said identify numbers of new ways that can help the students to learn English. So this is the verbs. The indicators, list 3 new ways to learn English, practice 3 ways to learn new words in English, and the third level, prioritize the most significant 3 ways.
That's good. So I can't generalize. Okay, this group, I know this will be good.
The issue about affected on environment, the evidence it will be 2 pictures show clean environment and environment with litter. The question starts with compare environment with litter and without litter, and the score about 3 levels: 0, insufficient evidence; 2, give her opinion about 2 pictures; 2, compare and support with details.
My hypothesis is gaining strength. Now, this group.
The skills will be evaluate 4 shapes. So the classes will be identify 1 shapes, differentiate the 4 shapes, draw the 4 shapes, and the last one will be search an example about the 4 shapes in the classroom.
Very good. Thank you. My goodness, we're getting some good stuff. This group.
We started with what if. What if the school is closed and that the student must be learned by himself, by themselves. So what are the skills and what the student do? He must learn by himself, make reports by himself, and do exercise by himself, and use the technology by himself also.
Well done. You wanted to add something?
Is that good idea if we said what if we have no school? Is that a good idea?
Yes. It's good. Good, excellent. This group.
Okay, well, the outcome was to write a paragraph about how litter can be reduced in a school, and the evidence would be to write a well-structured paragraph with suggestions on how to reduce litter and evaluate those suggestions. Then there was like a matrix of, well, a paragraph that's really well, that suggests the alternatives and weighs the pros and cons of each one. And a paragraph that, for example, that says that they reduce litter but make suggestions without any evaluation, and so on. I don't know if I got that right.
That's fantastic. I knew.
Choose to stop using disposables. No attempt. Provides a plan for alternatives. Some permanent tools. Suggests some permanent tools. Justifies the benefit of using their own cups and containers and utensils.
This is really wonderful. I wish we could collect them all together. If we collected all your single rubrics together, we would have a wonderful evaluation of this module. I wonder if it's possible to do that. Do we have any more? No, we haven't. All right, now, next. We're going to get to the serious end of the business. I've been asked, how does this lead to a competence or a construct? Now, if you have your Excel spreadsheet, we need to set up the spreadsheet a little like this. Across the top, we list all of the evidence statements that you've just written. You've only written one or two. But if we collected everybody... I've got to keep away from the speakers. If we collected everybody's rubric for this litter problem, we would write each of the quality criteria across the top. Can you see that? And we'd list the students' names down the left-hand side. You got that? Then, we have a real example here. Then, for each quality criteria, we would list, if the student could demonstrate that, we would code it with a 1. This time the 1 means that that quality criterion was observed. It's a code. And the decode is the quality criterion. If it was not observed, we score it with a 0. So you can see that there's lots of zeros and lots of ones in this diagram. And down the left-hand side we have the names of all the students. This actually is a class taught by my daughter. So it's a real class, mathematics class taught by my daughter. Now, if we just have all the skills across the top and all the names down the side, it's a bit of a mess. What Excel does for us is that it allows us to sort things. So, over on the right-hand side, you see a number 16, 4, 16, 8, 7. That's the number of ones, the number of things that the student has demonstrated. Down the bottom, if we had that, we would tally across the bottom row how many students demonstrated each behaviour. So, on the right-hand side, we've got how many behaviours each student demonstrated. And across the bottom we would have how many people demonstrated each behaviour. And we'd ask Excel to sort it. And that's what it looks like if it's sorted. Now look at the pattern. We can see that I'm almost afraid to stand here. We can see that the most capable students were able to demonstrate 16 of the behaviours. The least capable students about 3. Across the bottom, we've got 19 students in the class who could demonstrate everything. Over here, we've got some students in the class who couldn't demonstrate anything at all, had no ability. That was what we call the pretest. Now, watch what happens after she taught the class. Oh my, look at the change. Just look at the change. If we go back one, and we can see there's a kind of diagonal that we could draw a line through here. And everywhere there's a line like this, can you see this pattern here? Where we've got 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1. The 50% rule applies. That area where each student has 50% of the ones and zeros mixed up, what do we call that? The zone of proximal development. That's what the teacher sees the student is ready to learn. So, if we look up the top here, we can see that there's a group of students here and they're ready to learn these particular skills. So what the teacher does is teach those kids those skills. And what happens is this. We get a massive change. And if we drew the diagonal here, it would run away. And we haven't finished because we can still see that there's still a lot of learning for each individual student to do. So this is formative assessment. Now, the good news is that when this goes online, you'll be able to download an Excel spreadsheet which does it all for you. It will sort it. Step 0 writes the criteria across the top. Step 1 sorts it this way. Step 2 sorts it that way. Step 3 colours all of the ones so that it's obvious where the change took place. It's all done for you. All you have to do is write the rubrics. Don't ever do that on your own. Always work in a team, a collaborative team when you're writing rubrics, and when you write the rubrics, put them all on the table and have your colleagues critique them. And the rules that we said before, apply the rules and fix the rubrics, then use these in your class. Now we were going to do this for real, but it's 10 to 4, we're really finished. When the slide set goes online, there will be 2 web addresses. This will give you the Excel spreadsheet, and this will give you the instructions on how to use it. Okay? So, I think you've done an amazing job today. There are some super sophisticated rubrics, and I'm quite convinced that the women are far better at it than the men. And NAIF is a resource, so make sure this gentleman is probably one of our 2 best champions. And he hasn't had 3 hours of training. How many hours, NAIF? A couple of hundred? Yes. But he's a very, very good exponent of this, and I recommend that you contact him. That's it for today. I think you've done some superb work, and we've travelled a long way down that road. Thank you.
On behalf of the scientific committee of this conference, I would like to thank Professor Patrick Griffin, and also thank you for this engagement in this workshop. Really, it is a huge shift which needs a huge understanding of the culture of assessment in education, both in teaching and learning. I'm very sure that this engagement here is the culture of the competency-based education, where engagement of both teachers and students are the main source code of the achievement of the goals of competency-based learning. It is our pleasure again to thank you, and I think it is time to end this session, although if we wish that we could have more time to stay and complete this long journey, as our friend Naif mentioned before. So it is my pleasure now to thank Professor